My name is James Parrish, but everyone calls me Jimmy. At 38, I run the largest electrical contracting company in the Midwest, though most people still see me as the guy who used to crawl through attics fixing broken outlets. That's fine by me. Being underestimated is my greatest asset. The thing about electricity is that it follows predictable patterns. Current flows from high voltage to low voltage, always seeking the path of least resistance. People work the same way, which is how I knew something was wrong with my wife Beth long before I caught her cheating with my brother. It started 3 months ago, at our company's annual gala. Parrish Electric had just landed the biggest contract in our history, rewiring the entire downtown financial district. Everyone was celebrating, including Beth, who handles our public relations. She looks stunning in her black dress, the one that cost more than most people make in a week. "Jimmy, you outdid yourself this time," said Carl, our chief financial officer and my oldest friend. He raised his champagne glass toward the crowd of contractors, city officials, and business leaders filling the hotel ballroom. 20 years ago, you were installing ceiling fans in suburban kitchens. Now look at this. I should have felt proud. Instead, I watched my wife across the room, laughing too loudly at something my brother Jonathan was whispering in her ear. John was our vice president, 3 years older than me, and had always resented that I owned the company our father left to both of us. "Beth seems happy tonight," Carl observed, following my gaze. "She seems drunk," I replied. That's when I heard Sandra, Beth's best friend and our office gossip coordinator, talking to a group of wives near the bar. Sandra never met a secret she couldn't broadcast to the entire city within 24 hours. "I'm just saying, some women need more excitement than their husbands can provide," Sandra was saying, her voice carrying over the jazz music. "Workplace relationships happen for a reason." Mary, our bookkeeper, and the most loyal person I've ever known, caught my eye and shook her head slightly. She'd been trying to warn me about something for weeks, but I'd been too busy with the new contracts to pay attention. The evening took a turn when Beth stumbled slightly, grabbing John's arm for support. Someone had definitely been over-serving her, and my brother seemed perfectly happy to play the rescuer. "You know what?" Beth announced loudly, her voice cutting through nearby conversations. "I regret this marriage every single day." The words hit the room like a power surge. Conversations stopped. People turned to stare. John laughed nervously and put his arm around her shoulders. "She's just tired," he said to the crowd. "Long week, you know how it is." But Beth wasn't finished. "John gets it. John understands what a woman needs." I felt every eye in the room turn toward me, waiting for my reaction. In that moment, I could have chosen the path of least resistance, laughed it off, blamed the alcohol, pretended everything was fine. Instead, I walked over to my wife and brother, pulled an envelope from my jacket pocket, and handed it to Beth. "Funny you should mention that," I said, my voice calm and steady. "Because I regret it too. That's why we're getting divorced." Beth's face went pale as she opened the envelope and saw the divorce papers inside. The room fell completely silent, except for the jazz trio, who kept playing because nobody had told them to stop. "Jimmy, what are you doing?" John demanded. "Something I should have done months ago." I turned to address the crowd, most of whom were still staring in shock. "Ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you all for coming tonight. This has been very educational." I walked out of the ballroom, leaving my wife holding divorce papers, and my brother trying to explain to 300 guests why the evening had just imploded. The thing Beth didn't know, the thing nobody in that room knew, was that I'd spent the last 6 months quietly buying out our minority shareholders. As of that morning, I owned 85% of Parrish Electric. Beth was about to discover that when you bite the hand that feeds you, sometimes that hand controls your entire world. The morning after the gala, I sat in my office at 7 a.m., drinking coffee and reading the local business journal's coverage of our dramatic evening. The reporter had been kind, focusing mostly on our new contracts and mentioning the personal announcement only briefly. Still, by noon, my phone was ringing constantly. "Jimmy, what the heck happened last night?" Mary asked, closing my office door behind her. At 55, she'd been with Parrish Electric since before I took over from my father, and she had a talent for knowing everything that happened in our building. "My wife decided to announce her feelings publicly," I said. "I decided to respond in kind. She's been having an affair with John for 8 months. I set down my coffee cup carefully. "You're sure?" "I've seen them together after hours, late meetings that weren't on the schedule, business trips that didn't match the client files. Last month, I saw them at the Marriott downtown when they were supposed to be at different job sites. Mary pulled a folder from under her arm and placed it on my desk. I made copies of some things you should see: credit card receipts, hotel reservations, text messages she left open on the office computer. I opened the folder and immediately understood why Mary looked so uncomfortable. The evidence was overwhelming and disgusting. Hotel charges on the company credit card, restaurants across town where they'd been seen together, text messages between Beth and John that made me want to throw my computer through the window. "How long have you known?" I asked. I suspected for months, but I wasn't sure until I hired Sam. Sam Rodriguez was a private investigator I'd worked with years ago when we had problems with employee theft. Apparently, Mary had taken it upon herself to hire him again. "The report's in there too," she said quietly. Sam's investigation was thorough and professional. Photos of Beth and John entering hotels together, documentation of company resources being used for personal trips, a timeline that showed the affair had started shortly after John joined the company as vice president. The worst part was reading about how they talked about me. According to Sam's report, they'd been planning this for months. John wanted control of the company, and Beth wanted out of our marriage. They thought they could push me out gradually, make me look incompetent, and eventually force me to sell my shares. "There's something else," Mary said. "I think you should get paternity tests for the girls." My daughters B and Bree were 16 and 14, the center of my universe. The suggestion that they might not be mine felt like being electrocuted. "Mary, the timeline matches, Jimmy. I'm sorry, but you need to know." I spent the rest of the day reviewing Sam's report and Mary's documentation. By evening, I had a complete picture of how my wife and brother had been systematically betraying me while planning to take over my company. That night, I drove to the house I'd shared with Beth for 18 years. She was waiting in the kitchen, still wearing her work clothes, looking like she hadn't slept. "We need to talk," she said. "I think you said enough last night." "Jimmy, I was drunk. I didn't mean—" "Which part didn't you mean? The part about regretting our marriage, or the part about John understanding what you need?" Beth's face flushed. "You're being ridiculous. John and I work together. We're friends." I pulled out my phone and showed her one of the photos Sam had taken. Beth and John kissing in the parking garage of the downtown Marriott. "Friendly," I said. For a moment, Beth looked like she was going to deny everything. Then her expression hardened, and I saw the woman I'd been married to for 18 years disappear completely. "Fine," she said. "Yes, John and I are together. Yes, I want a divorce. But I'm not going to let you destroy my life over this." "I'm not destroying anything. You already did that." "I want half the company, Jimmy. Half of everything. And I want primary custody of the girls." I stood up and walked toward the door. "Good luck with that." "What's that supposed to mean?" I turned back to look at her one more time. "It means you're about to find out what happens when you try to steal from an electrician. We know all about short circuits." The parish electric board meeting was scheduled for Thursday morning at 10 a.m. I arrived early, carrying a briefcase full of documentation and a laptop loaded with Sam's evidence. The conference room was already filling up with board members, department heads, and senior staff. John walked in at exactly 10, wearing his usual expensive suit and confident smile. He nodded at me like nothing had happened, like he hadn't been planning to steal my company while sleeping with my wife. "Morning, Jimmy," he said, taking his seat at the opposite end of the table. "Ready to discuss the quarterly reports?" "Actually, I thought we'd start with personnel issues." I stood up and connected my laptop to the conference room projector. The first slide showed the parish electric organizational chart, with John's position as vice president clearly marked. "As you all know, family businesses face unique challenges," I began. "Trust becomes especially important when family members have access to company resources, confidential information, and decision-making authority." John looked puzzled but not concerned. He had no idea what was coming. "Unfortunately, I've discovered that trust has been violated at the highest levels of our organization." The next slide showed a timeline of John's employment, highlighting his access to company credit cards, client information, and strategic planning documents. Over the past 8 months, company resources have been systematically misused for personal purposes. Credit cards charged for unauthorized hotel stays, company vehicles used for non-business activities, confidential client information shared with unauthorized individuals. Now John looked worried. He started to stand up, but I continued before he could speak. "But the most serious violation involves the attempted theft of proprietary information and strategic planning documents, apparently as part of a scheme to undermine company leadership and force a hostile takeover. I clicked to the next slide, which showed photos of John and Beth at various hotels and restaurants, all paid for with company funds. John, would you like to explain to the board why you've been using Parish Electric Resources to conduct an affair with our public relations manager, who happens to be my wife? The room erupted. Board members started talking at once. John's face turned red, then pale. He looked around the table like a trapped animal. "Jimmy, this is inappropriate," he said. "Personal matters don't belong in a board meeting." "You're right," I replied. "Personal matters don't belong in company business, but theft does." I clicked to the final slide, which showed copies of credit card statements, hotel receipts, and expense reports that John had falsified to hide his activities. The total misuse of company funds over the past 8 months is approximately $47,000, but the attempted theft of client information and strategic documents represents a much more serious breach of fiduciary responsibility. John stood up abruptly, knocking over his coffee cup. The liquid spread across the conference table, soaking into the quarterly reports he'd prepared. "This is insane," he said. "You can't prove any of this." "Actually, I can." I handed a folder to Carl, who was serving as board secretary. "Complete documentation is included in your board packets: photos, receipts, witness statements, and a full investigative report." "John," said Patricia Wells, our longest-serving board member, "is this true?" John looked around the room at faces that had known him for years, people who had trusted him with company resources and confidential information. Then he looked at me. "You planned this," he said. "No, John. You planned this. I just documented it." Security arrived at that moment. I'd called them before the meeting started. 2 uniformed guards entered the conference room and waited by the door. "John Parrish," I said formally, "you're terminated for cause, effective immediately. Security will escort you from the building. Your company credit cards, keys, and access codes are revoked. Any company property in your possession must be returned before you leave." John stared at me for a long moment, then grabbed his briefcase and walked toward the door. As he passed my chair, he leaned down and whispered, "This isn't over." "Yes," I said quietly, "it is." After John left, I addressed the remaining board members. "I apologize for the dramatic nature of this presentation, but the evidence was clear and the situation required immediate action. Are there any questions about the termination decision?" Patricia raised her hand. "What about the public relations impact? This kind of scandal could affect our client relationships." "Our PR manager will no longer be handling company communications," I said. "I'll be managing all media relations personally until we hire a replacement." The meeting continued for another hour, covering quarterly reports and upcoming projects. By the time it ended, word had already spread throughout the building. John Parrish was gone, and everyone knew why. That afternoon, I drove to the downtown Marriott, where John kept a suite for his business meetings. I found him in the parking garage, loading boxes into his sports car. "Cleaning out your second office?" I asked. John slammed the trunk closed and turned to face me. "You think you're clever, don't you? I think I'm thorough. Beth was right about you. You're small-minded and petty. You never deserved to run Dad's company." I walked over to my pickup truck, which I'd parked directly behind his car. "You know what's funny about electricity, John? It always finds the shortest path to ground. Sometimes that path goes through expensive German engineering." I climbed into my truck and started the engine. John realized what was happening, just as I put it in reverse. "Jimmy, don't!" I backed up slowly and carefully, pushing his sports car about 6 feet forward, until the front bumper crumpled against a concrete pillar. The headlights shattered, the hood buckled, and the alarm started wailing. I rolled down my window. "Oops," I said. "Insurance should cover that." "Oh wait, you don't work for us anymore." John stood in the parking garage, staring at his destroyed car as I drove away. Beth's counterattack came exactly 1 week later. I was having breakfast with my daughters when the sheriff's deputy knocked on our door with a restraining order and emergency custody papers. "Dad, what's happening?" B asked, reading over my shoulder as I reviewed the legal documents. "Your mother is trying to get custody of you and your sister," I said. "She's claiming I'm emotionally unstable and potentially dangerous." "That's ridiculous," said Bree, my younger daughter. "You're the most stable person we know." The restraining order required me to stay away from Beth and prohibited me from contacting her directly. The custody petition claimed I had anger management issues, had threatened her physically, and was using the children as weapons in our divorce. None of it was true. But Beth had hired an expensive attorney who specialized in making husbands look dangerous. The strategy was simple: paint me as an unstable control freak who couldn't handle rejection. I called my own attorney, then drove to Mary's house to plan our response. She lived in a quiet neighborhood about 10 minutes from the office, in a small house filled with family photos and the smell of fresh coffee. "She's trying to get ahead of the story," Mary said, reading through Beth's petition. "Make herself look like the victim before the affair becomes public knowledge." The affair is already public knowledge. Half the business community was at that board meeting. But not the general public. Not the family court judge who'll decide custody. Mary was right. Beth was gambling that she could control the narrative, make me look like the villain, and win sympathy as the wronged wife whose husband had humiliated her publicly. "We need to flip this," I said. "Make her defend herself instead of attacking me." "What did you have in mind?" "A family barbecue." The annual parish family reunion was scheduled for the following Saturday. Beth's parents, my parents, aunts, uncles, cousins, and family friends would all be there. It was the perfect opportunity to present my side of the story to the people who mattered most. I spent the week preparing. Sam provided additional documentation of the affair, including hotel security footage that showed John and Beth together on multiple occasions. Mary helped me organize everything into a clear, factual presentation that would be impossible to deny or explain away. Saturday arrived with perfect weather. The reunion was held at Riverside Park, with picnic tables, grills, and a playground where the kids could play. About 60 people showed up, including Beth's parents, who had always treated me like the son they never had. Beth arrived with John, which surprised everyone. They'd apparently decided to make their relationship public, probably thinking it would seem more legitimate than sneaking around. "Jimmy," said Beth's father, pulling me aside after lunch, "what's this custody business about? Beth says you've been threatening her." "Tom, I've never threatened anyone in my life, but I have been documenting some things you should know about." I led him over to a picnic table where I'd set up a laptop and portable speaker. Within a few minutes, I had gathered most of the adults, including Beth's parents, my parents, and several aunts and uncles. "Family," I said. "I know this is supposed to be a fun day, but there are some things you need to know about what's been happening with Beth and me." Beth realized what was about to happen and started walking toward us. "Jimmy, don't do this here." "I think everyone deserves to know the truth," I said. I clicked play on an audio file Sam had recovered from Beth's phone. John's voice came through the speaker clearly. "Once we get rid of Jimmy, we can sell the company and move to California. Your parents will get over it eventually." Beth's voice responded. "I just want him out of our lives completely. The girls will adjust." The effect on the crowd was immediate and devastating. Beth's mother gasped. My father stood up, his face red with anger. Several people started talking at once. "That's enough," Beth said, rushing toward the laptop. But I had more. The next audio file was even worse, with Beth and John discussing how to manipulate the custody hearing and turn my daughters against me. "You recorded private conversations," Beth demanded. "Sam recovered these from your phone after you left it unlocked at the office," I said, "along with about 50 text messages discussing your plans to steal my company and destroy my relationship with my children." Beth's father stood up slowly. Tom was a retired police officer, a man who valued honesty and loyalty above everything else. He looked at his daughter like he was seeing her for the first time. "Beth," he said quietly, "is this true?" "Daddy, it's not what it sounds like. It sounds like you've been lying to everyone, including yourself." The reunion ended early. Beth's parents left without saying goodbye to her. My parents hugged me and promised to testify on my behalf in court. Several relatives who had been planning to support Beth changed their minds completely. As people packed up their picnic supplies, John approached me one last time. "You think you've won something here?" he said. "I think I've told the truth. Sometimes that's enough." "This isn't over, Jimmy." "John," I said, "it's been over since the day you decided to steal from family. You just didn't know it yet." That night, Beth's attorney called my attorney to discuss dropping the custody petition. Apparently, having your own parents refuse to support you in court tends to weaken your case considerably. With the custody battle resolved, I focused on the final phase of my plan, making sure Beth and John understood the full consequences of their choices. It wasn't enough to fire John and divorce Beth. They needed to learn that actions have consequences, and some consequences last forever. John had moved into a luxury condo downtown, the kind of place with a doorman, valet parking, and a monthly rent higher than most people's salaries. He was living off his savings while looking for a new job, which was proving difficult since word of his termination had spread throughout the industry. I spent a week studying the building's systems. As an electrical contractor, I had legitimate reasons to be in the area, and I knew several of the maintenance staff from previous jobs. It's amazing how much access you can get when people trust you and you understand how buildings work. On Thursday evening, I implemented what I called Operation Blackout. Using my knowledge of the building's electrical system, I created a series of minor but cascading failures that resulted in John's condo losing power for 6 hours. The backup generators worked fine for the common areas, but individual units experienced what appeared to be random electrical problems. While John was dealing with electricians and building management, I was across the street in a coffee shop, live streaming his increasingly frantic phone calls on a neighborhood social media group I'd created specifically for this purpose. "This is John Parrish," his voice came through clearly on the live stream. "I don't care what it costs. I need power restored immediately. I have important calls to make." The comments on the live stream were brutal. Neighbors who recognized him from news coverage of his termination had no sympathy for his electrical problems. "Maybe he should call his brother," someone wrote. "Oh wait, he can't, because he got fired for stealing." The next phase involved water. John's condo was on the 15th floor, and the building's water pressure system was more complex than most people realized. By creating a temporary pressure imbalance, completely legal and reversible, I caused his unit to experience what appeared to be a plumbing emergency. John's second live-streamed meltdown was even better than the first. Watching him try to explain to building management why his bathroom was flooding while his kitchen faucets produced only a trickle was deeply satisfying. "Sir," the maintenance supervisor said patiently, "we've checked the system 3 times. Everything appears to be working normally." "Nothing about this is normal," John shouted. The social media comments were even more savage this time. Someone had created a hashtag, #JohnProblems. Within hours, it was trending locally. But I wasn't finished. The final touch involved John's expensive German sports car, which had been repaired after our parking garage encounter. He kept it in the building's secure garage, probably thinking it was safe from further accidents. I didn't damage the car. Instead, I simply rearranged some things. When John came down to the garage on Friday morning, he found his car completely surrounded by orange traffic cones, construction barriers, and caution tape. A sign reading, "Electrical work in progress, do not move vehicle," was attached to his windshield. The beautiful part was that there actually was electrical work being done in the garage that day. I'd arranged for Parrish Electric to upgrade some of the lighting systems, and my crew needed to block off certain areas for safety reasons. John's parking space just happened to be in the middle of the work zone. "You can't do this," John told my foreman, Marcus. "This is my parking space." "Sorry, sir," Marcus replied. "Safety regulations require a 20-foot clearance around electrical work. We should be finished by Monday." John spent the weekend taking public transportation and ride-sharing services, which gave the #JohnProblems hashtag even more material to work with. Meanwhile, Beth was dealing with her own consequences. After losing her job at Parrish Electric, she'd applied for similar positions at other companies around the city. Unfortunately, the public relations industry is small, and everyone talks to everyone else. I didn't have to sabotage Beth's job search. Her reputation did that automatically. Companies don't like hiring PR managers who create scandals instead of managing them. By Monday, both Beth and John were discovering that their options were becoming increasingly limited. John couldn't find work in the electrical industry, and Beth couldn't find work in public relations. They'd burned bridges they didn't even know existed. That's when I received an unexpected phone call from Sandra, Beth's former best friend and our office gossip coordinator. "Jimmy," she said, "I think you should know that Beth and John are planning something desperate. They're talking about leaving town, maybe going to California." "Let them go," I said. "That's not all. They're talking about taking proprietary information with them. Client lists, project specifications, things they could sell to competitors." Now I was interested. "What kind of information?" "The Downtown Financial District project. They think they can sell the specifications to a competing contractor and make enough money to start over somewhere else." Meanwhile, I thanked Sandra and immediately called Sam. If Beth and John were planning to steal trade secrets, I needed documentation that would hold up in court. How do you want to handle this? Sam asked. Set up surveillance on both of them. If they try to steal anything, I want video evidence. Meanwhile, then we finish this permanently. The final confrontation came on a Thursday night in November. Sam's surveillance had confirmed that John was planning to break into the parish electric offices to steal project files and client information. Beth was supposed to help him, using her knowledge of our security systems and file organization. And they picked the right night for it. Most of the staff had left early for a long weekend, and the building would be empty except for security guards who made rounds every 2 hours. John probably thought he could get in and out without being detected. What he didn't know was that I'd upgraded our security system the previous month. Motion sensors, silent alarms, and high-definition cameras now covered every inch of the building. More importantly, I was monitoring everything from my office on the 3rd floor. I arrived at the building at 8 p.m. and settled in to wait. Sam was positioned across the street with additional surveillance equipment. We had local police on standby, though I hoped we wouldn't need them. Beth and John arrived at 10:30, parking in the alley behind the building. They were dressed in dark clothing and carrying flashlights, like amateur burglars in a bad movie. Beth used her keycard to disable the rear entrance alarm, not knowing that her access had been flagged to trigger additional security protocols. They're inside, Sam reported through my earpiece, moving toward the elevator. I watched on my monitors as they made their way to the 2nd floor, where we kept project files and client information. John went straight to the filing cabinets while Beth started copying files from the computers. This is taking too long, I heard Beth say through the audio surveillance. What if security comes back early? Relax, John replied. We'll be out of here in 20 minutes. That's when I activated the building's emergency lighting system. Every hallway, office, and stairwell suddenly blazed with bright white light, while alarms started sounding throughout the building. What the heck is happening? John shouted, dropping the files he'd been stealing. I spoke through the building's intercom system. John and Beth, this is Jimmy. You're trespassing on private property and attempting to steal confidential business information. I suggest you leave immediately. They ran for the stairwell, but I was ready for that too. The stairwell doors had automatically locked when the alarm system activated, trapping them on the 2nd floor. Jimmy, let us out, Beth screamed. I'm afraid I can't do that. The police are on their way. That wasn't entirely true. I'd called the police, but I'd also asked them to wait 5 minutes before responding. I wanted John and Beth to understand their situation completely before this ended. You can't keep us here, John said, trying to force open the stairwell door. Actually, I can. This is a security lockdown. The system won't reset until the police arrive and clear the building. I left my office and took the executive elevator down to the 2nd floor. John and Beth were standing in the hallway, surrounded by scattered files and looking like trapped animals. Hello, John, Beth. I nodded at each of them politely. I have to say, this is disappointing. I thought you'd learned your lesson after the board meeting. Jimmy, we can explain, Beth started. No need. I have everything on video. Breaking and entering, attempted theft of trade secrets, violation of non-disclosure agreements. My attorneys are going to have a field day with this. John stepped forward, his face red with anger and frustration. You think you're so smart, don't you? You think you've won something here. I think I've protected my company and my family from people who tried to destroy both. Your family? John laughed bitterly. Beth never loved you, Jimmy. She told me that years ago. You were just convenient, just a way to get access to Dad's company. I know, I said calmly. I've known for months. Then why did you fight so hard to keep her? I didn't fight to keep her, John. I fought to make sure she couldn't take anything else from me. Police sirens were getting closer. Through the windows, I could see flashing lights in the parking lot. This is your last chance, I said. Both of you, leave town, tonight. Don't come back. Don't contact me or my daughters. And don't ever try to use anything you learned while working for Parish Electric. And if we don't, Beth asked, then I'll prosecute you for industrial espionage, theft of trade secrets, and conspiracy to defraud. You'll both spend the next 5 years in prison, and when you get out, you'll be unemployable in any industry that requires background checks. The police entered the building just as I finished speaking. I met them in the lobby and explained the situation while John and Beth were escorted out in handcuffs. Are you pressing charges? The sergeant asked. I looked through the lobby windows at my wife and brother sitting in the back of separate patrol cars. their faces illuminated by flashing red and blue lights. "No," I said finally. "I think they've learned their lesson." The charges were dropped the next morning, but the damage was permanent. By noon, everyone in the city knew that John and Beth Parrish had been arrested for trying to steal from Parrish Electric. The local news ran the story, complete with security footage of them breaking into the building. Beth's parents called that afternoon to apologize. My daughters, who had been staying with friends during the final confrontation, came home and hugged me like I'd been gone for months instead of hours. "Dad," B said, "are they really leaving town?" "Yes," I said. "They're really leaving." "Good," said Bree. "We don't need people like that in our lives." I stood in my kitchen that evening, looking out at the backyard where my daughters were playing with our dog, and realized that the storm was finally over. Beth and John were gone. My company was secure, and my family was intact. The current had found its path to ground, just like it always does. Sometimes that path goes through people who thought they were immune to consequences. Sometimes it goes through expensive cars and luxury condos and carefully planned schemes. And sometimes, if you're patient and thorough and understand how electricity really works, you can make sure it goes exactly where it needs to go. I never saw Beth or John again. According to Sandra, they moved to Phoenix and tried to start a consulting business that failed within 6 months. Last I heard, John was installing residential electrical systems for a contractor who didn't know about his past, and Beth was working as a receptionist at a dental office. Parrish Electric is stronger than ever. We finished the downtown financial district project ahead of schedule and under budget. The company now employs over 200 people, and we're expanding into renewable energy systems. My daughters are thriving. B is applying to colleges, and Bree just made the varsity soccer team. They've never asked about their mother, and I've never volunteered any information about where she went or why she left. As for me, I'm exactly where I belong, running the company my father built, raising the daughters I love, and making sure that electricity flows where it's supposed to go. The path of least resistance isn't always the shortest path. Sometimes you have to be willing to take the long way around, to be patient, to let people reveal who they really are before you show them what consequences look like. But when you get it right, when you plan it carefully and execute it perfectly, the results speak for themselves. Current flows from high voltage to low voltage, always seeking the path of least resistance. People work the same way, and I'm very good with electricity. Prendativo. Titivertem pinking tinis, tinking timuanaf with 37 minutes and 33 seconds.